Silence ruled the ocean, the kind of silence that makes a sailor uneasy. A British officer lifted his binoculars toward the horizon, and everything changed. Cutting through the mist was a massive steel warship, a dark giant moving faster than something that size ever should. Larger than anything the Royal Navy had ever launched, a symbol of industrial power built to intimidate the world. This was Bismarck, a ship designed not just to fight, but to break morale, and only minutes later it would destroy Britain's greatest naval legend. The story of Bismarck truly began in 1936, when Germany pushed for a battleship that would represent total engineering dominance. The order was simple: build something unmatched, a ship that would control the Atlantic, intercept supply routes, and sever Britain's lifeline at sea. What emerged from that ambition was a monster of steel, 800 feet long, 50,000 tons heavy, layered in nearly 13 inches of armor, and armed with 8 15-inch cannons capable of striking targets from miles away with devastating force. Inside, it felt more like a small, self-sustaining city than a weapon. It had medical rooms, climate-controlled quarters, its own bakery running non-stop, and even an onboard theater for the 2,200-man crew. The sailors boarding it believed they were stepping onto an unsinkable masterpiece, a ship that was more myth than metal. But myths don't stop torpedoes. Captain Ernst Lindemann, the man commanding the ship, understood a truth others ignored. The ship was powerful, yes, but it was isolated. Unlike Britain, Germany didn't have a massive naval network backing it. No real reinforcements, no true safety net. If Bismarck was ever surrounded, it would face the full force of the Royal Navy alone. Lindemann said quietly before departure, "We return remembered, or we don't return." On May 18, 1941, the mission began. Operation Rheinübung. The goal: break into the Atlantic and hunt merchant supply convoys, the arteries feeding Britain. If those routes collapsed, Britain would collapse with them. British intelligence found the movement almost immediately. A sighting near Norway, and the message spread through command lines like a shockwave. Bismarck is at sea. Britain was already surviving on rationed fuel and food. If Bismarck reached the convoy lanes, dozens of supply ships could vanish before a defense even formed. This wasn't just a naval threat, it was a starvation threat. So the hunt began, the biggest naval pursuit in history. Battleships Rodney and King George III, the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, the Prince of Wales, multiple cruisers and destroyers, every available vessel charging toward one goal: find the giant before the giant finds them first. At 5:52 a.m. on May 24th, the confrontation sparked. HMS Hood, Britain's pride for decades, opened fire alongside the brand new Prince of Wales. The ocean swallowed their shells before they found impact. Then Bismarck fired back. The third German salvo hit perfectly. One 15-inch shell tore through the Hood's weak deck armor, struck the ammunition magazine, and in a moment that defied disbelief, the Hood detonated. A pillar of flame shot 1,000 feet upward. The ship split in half. 1,418 sailors on board. Only 3 survived. The rest were erased in under 180 seconds. 6 minutes. That's all it took for the Atlantic to turn white with fire. But Bismarck was wounded. One of the shells from the Prince of Wales ruptured a fuel tank. The ship began leaking oil into the ocean, a long dark scar stretching across the sea. A wounded animal bleeding into the abyss. Lindemann wanted retreat for repairs. The order was refusal. Continue forward. And that decision became the countdown. For over 31 hours, Bismarck disappeared into a violent weather front, using a brilliant deception turn, making British radar believe an attack was coming. The Royal Navy scattered in confusion. When the fog swallowed the circle, the giant was gone. Panic erupted in the Admiralty. A ship that dangerous couldn't just vanish into the ocean. It could be anywhere. It could already be sinking convoys. Then came the twist. The ship kept sending long radio transmissions back to command. One broadcast lasted nearly 30 minutes. Germany didn't realize Britain had signal tracking equipment capable of triangulating transmissions across the sea. That message acted like a flare in the storm. Here we are. They found the signal. Bismarck was heading toward France, likely the port of Brest. But Britain had a problem: fuel. Most of the fleet was running dry. Only one force could strike in time: Ark Royal. The aircraft they launched were called Swordfish, biplanes wrapped in fabric, slow enough to look like ghosts from an older age. Even in 1941, they seemed out of place in a sky full of modern war machines. They flew at roughly 90 miles per hour, wobbling through storm winds like fragile insects over an iron predator. And yet, that slowness became their secret weapon. The targeting systems built to track fast aircraft simply couldn't adjust to something moving at a crawl. The calculations broke, the predictions failed, and the guns struggled to follow a threat that defied logic by being too slow. Wave after wave, torpedoes streaked toward the ocean and missed. 14 strikes dissolved into the Atlantic, with nothing to show but white trails and rising tension. Then came the 15th. One single hit, perfectly placed, punching into the stern. No explosion grand enough for propaganda reels. No instant sinking. Just a brutal mechanical verdict. The rudder locked. The course died. The Atlantic took control. The beast of steel could no longer hunt forward, no longer retreat. It could only carve endless circles into black water, spinning like a wounded giant, realizing the world had finally grown bigger than its myth. Through the night, smaller ships circled it like wolves around a crippled titan. They didn't need to destroy it yet. They only needed to keep it awake, keep it cornered, keep it hopeless. Torpedoes flashed through the darkness, not to kill, but to torment. Every alarm, every false impact, every radar blip forced the crew to stand frozen at their posts, nerves snapping under exhaustion. No sleep, no repairs, no moment to breathe. The ocean itself had become their enemy, the British fleet merely the instrument delivering its sentence. By dawn on May 27th, the final silhouettes emerged on the horizon. The battleships Rodney and King George V. Their arrival didn't carry the suspense of war. It carried the certainty of consequence. This was no longer a duel of cannons. This was a reckoning with physics, time, and isolation. The distance between ships shrank to just 4 miles, close enough to guarantee impact, far too close for escape. Shells slammed forward in overwhelming numbers, more than 2,800 of them, punching into steel again and again. Turrets buckled, fire devoured decks, command systems collapsed into dead metal. The crew vanished in pieces of history that would never carry their names. Still, the ship held on, not out of destiny, but out of stubborn engineering. Armor intact, hull refusing surrender. A machine built to endure everything except being surrounded by an entire ocean of enemies. So the final act came not from outside, but from within. The crew triggered flooding protocols, opening the ship's veins themselves, not to survive, but to choose the ending on their own terms. At 10:39 a.m., the Atlantic didn't kill Bismarck. It accepted its surrender. The giant tilted, rolled onto its side, and vanished into the cold with eerie dignity. Over 2,000 souls aboard were carried down with it. Only 114 would ever surface again. The captain? He didn't scramble, didn't flee, didn't break character. The last confirmed image wasn't heroic, just human. A man standing still as everything he commanded slipped beneath him, giving one final salute to a ship that had been engineered to stand tall, but forced to die spinning. Years later, explorers found the wreck resting in absolute darkness 3 miles below. The hull was silent, largely intact, frozen like a fossilized warning. The cannons still angled upward, not aiming anymore, just remembering. A monument not to victory, but to ambition without company, power without backup, engineering without a future. The Atlantic had preserved it like a lesson locked in deep water, unreadable by sonar, but loud enough for history to feel. And that lesson? It didn't need ideology to survive copyright. It only needed truth. No machine ends a war by itself. No masterpiece survives solitude. The moment the Atlantic witnessed its first triumph, the ocean had already begun writing its final chapter. 8 days at sea, minutes of dominance, decades of legacy. And then, the world moved on, leaving nothing but silence behind.